The United States is the only country in the world where property rights commonly extend, quote, up to heaven and down to hell, which means that landlords have the exclusive right to lease their subsurface mineral estates to petroleum companies. Shale gas extraction, commonly known as fracking, is often portrayed as an energy revolution that will transform the American economy and geopolitics. But in greater Williamsport, Pennsylvania, landowners leasing their subsurface mineral estates and fracking are personal. Colin Jerolmack is a professor of sociology and environmental studies at New York University, where he also teaches courses on human-animal relations and chairs the environmental studies department. He is the author of The Global Pigeon, Fieldwork Encounters and Discoveries, published in 2013. He is also co-editor on several volumes, including Approaches to Ethnography, Modes of Representation, and Analysis in Participant Observation with Seamus Kahn and Environment and Society. Ralph Kisberg is a co-founder and consultant on the board of the nonprofit Responsible Drilling Alliance, an organization to educate and advocate on shale gas development issues. Before working with Responsible Drilling Alliance, Ralph was a ranch manager for the Pueblo of Sandia Native Sovereign Nations Rainbow Village Ranch, a 4,000-acre hunting and recreational property in the mountains of northern New Mexico. Jerolmack's book, Up to Heaven and Down to Hell, Fracking, Freedom, and Community in an American Town is the subject of tonight's talk. Please join me in welcoming Colin Jerolmack and Ralph Kisberg.
Thanks so much. It's really great to be here. And in addition to thanking Town Hall Seattle, I really want to give a heartfelt thank you to Ralph Kisberg. I came to know Ralph when I moved to Williamsport to do this research, and Ralph became my key informant and my close friend. And so this is really fun for me to be here with him. And Ralph and I talked about it, and what we're going to do is I'm going to give some brief remarks just to introduce you a little bit to the book and a few of the characters in the book, and then Ralph and I are going to have a conversation. So yeah, so just to especially since we're talking to a West Coast audience, I think I'll show you a little. I have some pictures here, but to get a look at the Marcellus Shale itself. So the Marcellus Shale, as you can see, stretches from upstate New York down through West Virginia. It is the largest shale gas field in Pennsylvania. And so this is, and what has happened is it's really this new technology of hydraulic fracturing, or it's really horizontal drilling combined with hydraulic fracturing, which has made it possible to access the oil and gas that is buried underneath the ground, in many cases well over a mile under the ground. We've known it's there for a long time. We didn't know how to get it. And so just to super quickly say what we mean when we're talking about fracking, so what we colloquially call fracking is really this combination of horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing. So this shale layer is deep. You drill down vertically with these remote control drill bits that as you approach the shale layer, you can actually drill horizontally, and they can drill horizontally for well over a mile, sometimes up to 2 miles. So you can go right through that shale layer. All the gas or oil in Pennsylvania in the Marcellus Shale, it's gas, is frozen in that layer. So you got to break it out of there. So they drill through there. They drop down basically depth charges that break up the rock. And then the hydraulic fracturing process is when you inject millions of gallons of water mixed with proppant, usually sand or something like that, and then chemicals, lubricants or anti-corrosive agents. And so that water shoots through the cracks, and then the sand keeps those cracks open just enough so that the oil and gas can come out. And so that's what, and it's really, this technology took off in the early to mid 2000s and allowed the so-called shale gas boom to begin in the Marcellus region, particularly in Pennsylvania around 2008, 2009. And so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about drilling. I'm from Pennsylvania, and I really got interested when I started hearing about Pennsylvania as the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. I also teach in the environmental studies department, so as this was becoming a thing, I really wanted to understand more about it. And I'm also very interested in communities and in communities. I'm basically an anthropologist, so my method is to go and live with a community in order to understand them. And so I decided to move to Williamsport, Pennsylvania. Some of you might know it as the home of Little League Baseball. It was the most heavily drilled county in Pennsylvania in 2012. Drilling took off a little later there than some other parts of Pennsylvania. So that was part of my reason for selecting it, was because I could go to a place where there was a lot of leasing and drilling activity happening. And I want to understand how fracking was impacting rural community life, especially in places that had witnessed deindustrialization and population decline, but now there's this opportunity, in theory anyway, to bring jobs back and for people to make money by leasing. And so what I find really compelling is that, and interesting, is that there's this huge national debate around fracking, for or against it, but the way that fracking proceeds in most places is not about which side wins out in politics. Because as was alluded to in the introduction, in America, most landowners own the mineral rights. The so-called energy revolution is in large part a series of individual choices made by thousands of landowners who privately decide, sitting down with a representative of a gas company, whether they want to lease their mineral rights for drilling. And of course, if they do so, they make money. They get a leasing bonus, they get royalties. And so property rights, I talk about in the book, property rights are really thought of, because property rights are so sacrosanct and so protected. It makes it seem as if fracking is a private decision. Every individual has the power to lease their own mineral rights. They don't have to check in with their neighbors before they sign a lease, for instance. But this ostensibly private decision has public consequences. Of course, a lot of the way you're aware of some of them, we often talk about it in terms of the planetary consequences. Methane, the natural gas that they're extracting, is a potent greenhouse gas. And if you burn it, yes, it burns cleaner than coal, but it's still burning carbon. And so it's still a fossil fuel that is contributing to global warming. But in and around Williamsport, locals were more concerned about the more visceral and immediate impacts. Impact on neighbors' air, sometimes their water quality, their ability to enjoy their property when this whole sort of region is industrialized, the loss of what some people refer to as rural character. And so, to step back a little bit, how I try to situate this tension between the power, property rights and the power people have to lease their land, but then how it has these public impacts, speak to this larger dilemma, which is arguably one of the most central recurring dilemmas in American society, which is how to balance individual freedom and the commonwealth. Obviously, you see this right now with COVID, right? Whether individuals have the right to go maskless and to gather indoors, even though that risks population health. You see this in debates about gun control, whether an individual has the right to own an automatic assault rifle, even though that can injure a lot of people. And so in the book, that revolves around this larger tension as it plays out in the conflict between individual land sovereignty and the public good. And I developed this idea that I call the public-private paradox. And so what I say is property rights in America are often treated as if they are akin to free speech. So other environmental decisions, so we treat them as personal decisions. So for instance, eating meat, it actually has a huge carbon footprint. Choosing to drive an SUV rather than an electric car, or choosing to drive any car rather than taking public transportation. These are treated as personal decisions that ought not be regulated. But these decisions in the aggregate, of course, impact the public sphere. And they create greenhouse gas emissions that create droughts, flooding, global warming. And so what I argue is that the public-private paradox is that we treat a lot of decisions that in the aggregate are actually public as private decisions that ought not be regulated or restricted. But that making these seemingly private decisions alienates other people from their own ability to enjoy scarce resources, and sometimes even alienates them from their civil liberty, which I'll get into a bit with some of the examples. So what I want to do in just about 2 or 3 more minutes is give really brief portraits of a few of the main subjects that you would meet in the book that help illustrate some of the core tensions. And so I'll begin with George, who Ralph knows quite well. Let's see if I can make this work right. So George Hagemeyer is an individual. He lives on 77 acres outside of Williamsport. He inherited this land from his father. And when he's a retired custodian, and in 2006, he signed a lease with an energy company. And he was very much for drilling. George is somebody that I would describe as libertarian leaning. He very much defended property rights and self-reliance. When I asked him, did you talk to anybody else about this decision? Because all those big rig trucks coming in, the possibility of fracking contaminating drinking water, did you talk to your neighbors? Did you talk to anybody else? And he said, no, it's my property. I'll do as I damn well please. And so he very much had this kind of live and let live attitude that it's nobody's business what he did with his own property. And he made a lot of money. When his first royalty check came in for the first few months of production, it was almost $34,000. He was on his way. These were royalties that he gets from gas that's extracted from the 6 gas wells on his property. George was on his way to becoming what some people call a shaleionaire. But there was this moment that happened about a year later where I invited George and Ralph to come speak to my class at NYU. And my thinking was that Ralph would more or less represent the perspective against drilling, or at least being cautious about fracking, and George would represent the local who benefited from it, who supported it. And George showed up, and at the end of the class, students asked him how he felt about it. And there was this moment where he told my class, and this is the first time I heard him say, that he regretted leasing his land. And this has kind of become the narrative now. And what I found so striking about it was it wasn't for the obvious reason that you might think. His water didn't get contaminated. There were no major spills on his property. It was really this series of minor indignities. So a security guard shack stationed there where the guard told him he couldn't drive down his driveway until they were done moving the trucks in and out. A security camera installed on the well pad that he didn't know about. And when he walked across his the well pad, which is in his backyard, the company the next day said they caught him trespassing and that he could be arrested. And so what George didn't really realize is how, in a way, by signing this lease, he had lost the thing that was most valuable to him, his land sovereignty, and he had become, in a way, a tenant on his own property. Oh, this is George and Ralph. George, with his newfound money, rented a stretch limousine to take them to New York City. And he told me that it was the first and the last time he would be coming to New York City. As soon as the talk was over, they turned around and went home. This is what the well pad looked like on George's backyard here, just to give you a sense of the kind of operation that some people have here. And so, okay, so next, and this will be the last character sketch I'll give you, really just trying to give you a little bit of a taste, but this is Tom and Mary Crawley. They live about 18 miles from George, and they live on a much smaller plot of land, about 9 acres. And so they were on the fence about whether or not to lease. They weren't against fracking in the beginning, but they knew they wouldn't make that much money. When you only have 9 acres, you're just going to get the leasing bonus. If you get royalties, they're not going to be that much royalties probably. In the end, they made about $7,000. But all the neighbors around them, a lot of whom were larger landowners, wanted to lease their property. And so they decided to join their neighbors in creating what's called a landowner coalition. So they represented roughly 3,000 acres. And the thinking was, if you want to sign one of us, you have to sign all of us, and they could negotiate as a block for better leasing conditions. However, soon after a gas well was drilled on their neighbor's property, they wound up with explosive levels of methane in their water. And here, what you can see in this picture behind them is actually that plastic tube is the vent that is trying to release as much methane as possible from their drinking water well before the water goes into the house, so that hopefully explosive levels of methane are not coming into the house. I was really struck at the time. They were really angry about what had happened. They were angry that their state representative, who was very sympathetic to the oil and gas industry, wasn't doing anything to help them. They were angry that the Department of Environmental Protection did not deem it a priority to help them. And I pretty much thought that they were going to turn into what people sometimes call accidental activists. Like, they were going to tell their story. They were going to come out against drilling. Ralph and some other people from the Responsible Drilling Alliance were trying to talk to this couple and offer them help, information, pro bono lawyer. And they wouldn't talk to the media. They wouldn't share their story. They wouldn't talk to environmental advocates. And I couldn't really understand why, because I felt like they had nothing to lose. And what really struck me was, what I didn't realize was that what most concerned them wasn't even their own plight, but they were worried about their neighbors and their community. And in particular, it took me 7 months to talk to them. And when I finally talked to them, what they said was, we're really worried that if our story gets out there, these environmentalists, these protesters are going to show up at our neighbor's house, whose property hosts the gas well, and they're going to protest, and they're going to like camp out, and they're going to make a big stink out of it. And it sounded really far-fetched, but it really wasn't. I'll just point to 2 events. So not that many months before this group called Artists Against Fracking, made up of some celebrities you might know, like Yoko Ono and Susan Sarandon, took a bus through Susquehanna County, the neighboring county, and brought a bunch of journalists and got out and protested and drew attention to the harms of fracking. And there was another incident locally where a mobile home community was going to be people that lived there were going to be forced to leave because they were going to turn the place into a water withdrawal site for fracking. And that attracted a bunch of activists who were veterans of Occupy Wall Street, who came in and started camping out there and called it Occupy Riverdale. And so the Crawleys kind of saw, if coming out as against what happened to them would attract these people that in their mind were not from the community, who were like these urban liberals who really didn't have an understanding of how things worked around here. And they were really concerned that their neighbors would bear the brunt of it. And so it was really out of this desire to protect their community that they refused to speak up, ironically, even though it would have helped their own situation. And so, yeah, and so the last thing I'll do before we open up is I'll just read you the very last paragraph of my book, which I think starts to hint at some of the larger themes that some of you might want to talk about or ask about in the Q&A if they don't come up in the conversation with Ralph. I write, I've come to the conclusion that America's legal and political privileging of individual sovereignty and property rights sanctions the usurping of the commons, frays the fabric of communities, and undermines the social contract. I do entertain some glimmer of optimism that if more of us recognize that the externalities produced by personal land and energy use choices violate others' human rights, more people might push for green energy policies that rein in those externalities in the name of other core American principles, namely fairness and democracy. After all, the idea that everyone deserves the same freedoms and that every community stakeholder should have a say in decisions that affect them is as American as Little League Baseball. So with that, I'm happy now to begin a conversation with Ralph. And Ralph, one thing that people might want to know is how you and I came to know each other.
Yeah, well, thank you, Colin, and thank Seattle Town Hall. This is really great to be here. I guess that you found RDA, Responsible Drilling Alliance, on the internet, and you sent me an email, and you said, "Hey, I'm in town. I'm doing this book. Would you care to meet with me?" So we went to our local fantastic coffee shop, and we sat down and we started talking. That's how I recall it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So and just to say, Ralph, it turned out that Ralph is, I really couldn't have found a better person. He knows more about fracking in the region, it seemed to me where every single pipeline runs, where every gas well is, every permit that's being considered, every violation that is going on. What I felt like, aside from being a source of information, I felt like I had found this kindred spirit in Ralph, because Ralph, in a lot of ways, and I want to ask you, Ralph, to talk a bit about this. He was doing what I came there to do. Ralph would travel the back roads, and if he saw a gas well or saw drilling activity, would get out and talk to people. And if he, if he got to know, you got to know all kinds of people that worked for the oil and gas industry, people who suffered contamination, people who had leased their land and loved that they leased their land for drilling. And so I wanted to ask you, Ralph, if to say a bit about your, how you, how you co-founded RDA, and then how you went about trying to connect with people in the region.
Right. Well, I'd lived out west most of my adult life, and moved back here in 2008, just as it was ramping up. And I had worked in this industry years ago, so I knew a little bit about it. I was a youthful indiscretion. And when I got home, the newspaper was obviously cheerleading this in an incredible manner. And so was the county. The county set up a task force. They sent a bunch of realtors and the chamber people and one county commissioner down to Texas, and were wined and dined. And that's what I used to do when I worked in the oil and gas industry, was set up these kind of dog and pony shows. So I wasn't real happy. I also later went to work in the Gulf of Mexico on rigs to try to production platforms, I should say, to try to learn about what went on in the field. So wasn't real confident it was going to go well here. And I just kept talking about it with people, and they said, you should meet this person, you should meet that person. And I met finally with three others, two of whom had leases and two who did not, of the four of us. And the two who did not would never have a lease. And we just started meeting once a week and talking about this issue to try to get more information, mainly through the internet. And that's how it sort of came about.
So, so, but not everybody else, Ralph, if I could say, that's involved in environmental advocacy does what you do. If as far as you're not just what I find so interesting, what I found so interesting and still do about you is that, for instance, you were the one that introduced me to George, right? So if you could talk a bit about how you decided that one of the facets of your advocacy was going to be just driving around and like basically, getting out and talking to people like George.
Yeah, I guess I got lucky when I got back here from working out west. I got a job as the recruiter for the 2010 census. I got to travel all around all these counties right before this was happening. It was just starting. So I saw these beautiful places, and then I began to see how they changed and how the roads became very difficult to travel on. And I was curious about it. I wanted to learn more about what was going on. And I don't know. I think I was lucky that early on, I met someone who reached out to me who was in another county, who had a lease and ended up about 500 feet from a well pad, and who had health issues before that, and ended up working for their county as a liaison between the industry and landowners. And so that was an even more rural county than Lycoming County, our county. So I knew that there was going to be different perspectives about this. There was all this buzz in town about how wonderful it was going to be, how we're going to become the next Pittsburgh, and it was just ridiculous in some way. But things were changing. Thousands of people moved in. Jobs were coming from other places. People were coming to work, and the rents were going up, and so I just felt like I needed to really meet with people who were experiencing this and see what they were seeing, both people who were happy about it and people who were not.
So tell us about the first time you met George.
Well, there was a group from Lehigh University, a bunch of students and a couple of professors, and they contacted me, and was driving around, and I happened to see some people laying a pipeline, and I said, "Hey, is there any fracking going on? Because that's the big show." And they said, "Yeah, just up the road." And I drove up there, and it was George's property. And I just knocked on the door and explained to him that we had some students. And George was very happy to show these kids around. And these were engineering students, and they were horrified by this thing. And, I wanted to say to them, and I did, look, this is incredible engineering, no matter what you think of it and the consequences. This is something that's pulling gas out of somewhere where we could never get anything. And we all know, they all knew the bad news by then, but just kind of wanted to balance it with that angle. And George was so excited about it at that point and proud of it. And it was, he's an interesting character, and I really became friendly with him, and we have a lot in common, and we knew some people in common. And so, that's how that happened. And when we talked, I said, we have to meet George, and because he has a well pad on his property, and most people who didn't want me going anywhere near it, So that's how that came about.
So, one of the things I talk about in the book, Ralph, which you well know because you've read the whole book, but is how RDA, the Responsible Drilling Alliance, is pretty small. It's a small group of core members. Obviously, you reach a lot more through your newsletter and email list. But and I talk about how, it's pretty hard, to be blunt, to get a reception with a lot of people in the area. But I wonder if you could, give folks a sense of, what the obstacles were to getting people on board, with sometimes even relatively sensible policies, right, about regulations, because especially at the time that I was there, your organization was beginning to talk about staking out a more, a position like of just ban fracking everywhere, but your organization was pretty middle of the road, in the sense that you were arguing, at least front and center, for pretty reasonable restrictions on the industry that would prevent the worst sort of accidents, right? But nonetheless, it seemed like you still had trouble getting traction with especially in the more rural parts of the county. And so maybe if you could talk about that.
Yeah, let me give you a story. Maybe that'll help. Back when this started, Pennsylvania had a setback from your front door to your property, your dwelling, to the a well, which is in the center of the pad, which may be almost 5 acres, usually a little less, but and so that was 200 feet. So that was highly unacceptable to a lot of people, and it happened that there was a family who lived across the street from a big farm. They lived on a small parcel, but they built their dream home, and it faced where the farmer wanted the well pad to go. So now these people had a lease also, but there was a different company. So the company that put the well across the street, the woman who was their government relations person, their face of the company in our community, was our former mayor. And she actually went over to them when this well pad began with a potted plant and say, well, here's a little something from Anadarko Petroleum. So these poor people, I mean, this went on and on and on, the lights and the noise and the who knows what they were breathing. And we had a wonderful photographer in town, and he got their permission, and he went up in their bedroom that faces the pad 200 feet away, or less really, the edge of the pad. And he has this wonderful picture of the two of them with their sort of, hand on the shoulder, looking out their window through the curtain to the window on this display of 4th of July lighting. I mean, it was just nuts. So we blew that picture up, and we went down to Harrisburg with hundreds of other people from all over the state who showed up and tried to change that law, and it got changed. It got changed to 500 feet. So, we were able to do things in spite of the fact that we didn't have much reception. But that farmer across the street wouldn't talk to us. And frankly, we only talked to people who approached us mainly. I mean, and we got a lot of them. We really did it at the time. We still get them. I had quite a few this winter, but not as it used to be. But so yeah, I mean, just to try to make inroads with people that don't want to hear you, it's pretty difficult.
And why do you think they don't want to hear you? Do you think it's just because they're making a lot of money, or do you think there's more to it than that?
No, I mean, first of all, this was sold as this great patriotic duty. Terry Engeller, who's one of our advisors, we assembled a good group of advisors. He's known as the father of the Marcellus. He was on the cover of Time magazine with that title, and we had him debate an anti-development person from Cornell, and Terry, he said, when we had this debate in a little town up north, and he said, you're going to have to sacrifice here. When John F. Kennedy asked us to sacrifice, we did it. And you're going to sacrifice for the good of the country. And that was the line a lot of people bought: overseas wars and reliance on foreign oil and all this stuff. So people believed what they were doing was right around here. We understood that, it wasn't just about money. A lot of people had small lots, and they weren't going to get anything out of this except this little signing bonus in the beginning, which sometimes was up to $6,000 an acre. Wasn't that little, but certainly weren't going to get any royalty money. And some of these scoundrels ended up charging you money if you weren't careful, in the way they design a deal, sort of like a movie with post-production costs that could go on the leased landowner. So yeah, that's kind of how that began.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that happened that really came to a head when I was living in Lycoming County, Ralph, which you know well. So Pennsylvania, so there was a lot of drilling going on state land. And at the time that I was there, this area of Loyalsock State Forest, colloquial called Rock Run, to speak about an area that is larger than just the creek itself, which is Rock Run, which is a popular area that you can easily access to go swimming or fishing. There's also more rugged trekking and hiking opportunities around it that you and some others discovered the year before that an energy firm had bought the mineral rights not just leased them, but bought them. The mineral rights were severed. The state did not control the mineral rights. And that at the time that I was living there, it seemed drilling was imminent. People had even found stakes in the woods of where well pads were going to go, and that this area is beloved by so many people was going to feature, I think, 26 well pads, each of which would be 4 to 5 acres of clearance. In addition, you have to have a whole tangle of pipeline right of ways to connect them. You have to have new access roads for all of the trucks. And this became a huge thing. Once it became public, there was all of these hearings. I'm wondering if and it's a part of the book that I spend quite a bit of time on. I would love for you to walk the audience through a bit that fight and relate it to leasing in state forests.
Sure, I can try to do that quickly. First of all, we have wonderful water resources, and that particular spot is a source water, just incredible resource we think for the Chesapeake Bay. We're the heart of the Chesapeake Bay, and we're on the west branch of the Susquehanna River, and the Susquehanna is the big feeder into the top of the bay. And it's a huge river, and we have creeks the size of western rivers, easily all 4 of them in this county alone, 3 big ones and one not quite as big. But so we knew that this was a valuable place for many reasons. It's quite beautiful to us. It's remote. It's a high plateau. We had glaciers come through, and if you see it on a map, it stands out. It's flatter on top in a lot of places. There's big 2 beautiful streams in it, and mountains on the side, deep valleys. And it just meant a lot to people who grew up in really 4 counties who surround it. It's at the top of Lycoming County, and they were all being hit by gas development. And, private people leased pretty much 90%, I would guess. So it was surrounded by leases, and we really, we didn't want to see anything happen up there. And we had the people who discovered it, they discovered some flagging up there that the company was laying in. Mm-hmm. They said, we're going to move if they develop this area. And that's how people really felt about it, that knew it. And so I did what we should do, which is contacted the operator, our former mayor, and said, their representative, and said, hey, what's going on in Rock Run? And she said, Rock Run, what's that? I never heard of it. But she quickly assembled a meeting, about 20 people from around the county. And she said, I'll bring our staff, and we'll go talk with you, and then we'll take a field trip and we'll go look at it. And so, they were aware maybe that this was going to cause some trouble. And we were able to really team up with all the statewide organizations, and they've done a wonderful job. The Sierra Club in particular had this incredible leader in Pennsylvania who was a lawyer, and she's just amazing. And other statewide groups that are part of national groups and are just Pennsylvanian too. They all chipped in, and we all just got together and really publicized this thing, and really made it tough on the people who had the rights, because really this thing is evolving, this fracking thing, and they have this reach, and it started out at maybe 5,000-6,000 feet, and then it went to 7,500 feet, and in places like Ohio it goes for 15,000 feet. I mean, they don't need to be on the public land. They don't belong there, and we have certain rights in Pennsylvania. The unfortunate thing, of course, is if you don't want them in your neighborhood either. So it's difficult, but we didn't want them up there, and neither did most people. And we were able to get to this consensus that comes from this woman named Lois Gibbs, who was the person who fought the Love Canal issue, if anybody remembers that or has studied it. And Lois has a wonderful organization that helps people in environmental fights. And she said, if you get 500, 600 people every time you want to raise a little fuss, then you're going to get attention. And that's what happened with this. And this is because people from all over, from New York State, who really were against fracking spreading up to them, and people around our state, people in the Delaware River Basin, for instance, that does not have fracking, even though a lot of it's in Pennsylvania. They came out for this. They came to the side of the 4-county region, and that's kind of how this went. And then we happened to find an operator who had half the rights, who got it, who just understood it. And that probably helped too. But the biggest thing that helped was this was going to be $1.2 billion. This was going to cost, well, everybody in our political delegation here loves that idea. You know, that was going to be maybe 300 million of that was going to be spent in the county, just feeding and housing and paving roads and building pads. So, well, they weren't going to oppose this at all. But, you know, the economics turned, and that helped. And the industry gets, you know, they can do things that they couldn't do before. So far it's remained untouched.
Yeah, and I guess just to put a fine point on that, about, so it's still theoretically possible, but 9 years ago it looked like it was going to happen that year. Yeah. And you know, the coalescing of all these different groups has managed to keep it at bay for 9 years, and it does not appear, am I correct, it does not appear to be imminent?
Well, we don't know anything about these people's plans. If you have one in your backyard, they won't tell you what the plan is. Everything's proprietary, everyone's secret, and everything also, you know, comes out of Houston, Dallas, or Denver, and they don't know what's going to happen the next day from the people in the field sometimes. So it's a very bizarre business, and you know, there's consequences to that. And one of them is, it's just, they have all the laws in place. They have the rights, as you said. They have the courts. The only thing we have in Pennsylvania that a lot of places don't have is an environmental rights amendment. And that is something that is only begun, and you mentioned in the book and talk about it a bit. And that's something that should spread all over, we think. And people are trying to do it, especially the Delaware Riverkeeper organization. So there's some hope here that we think even the Republican governor and the legislature, who couldn't love gas anymore, probably, they did maintain the moratorium on more state leasing, and we hope that that's forever now. But you never know. There's no forevers with this. It's something that came up years ago, 50 years ago. David Brower, that was the president of the Sierra Club for a long time, wrote a book, and he said, you know, the conservationists, you have to win every time, and the other side, the industry, only has to win once. So that's what you're up against in all these fights.
Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna ask you one more question. I mean, I can ask you more, but then we'll see if folks from the audience want to put some questions in the chat or through the text. That would be wonderful. But Ralph, I want to ask you, what did it feel like to read a book of which you are a central character?
Well, it's ridiculous, but you know, what can I say? I mean, we were a group, you know, that operated with about 15 people, a lot of different talents. And we're still a group that operates with fewer people, but we get things done still. So it's a group effort. And I think that was my first comment was, well, there's too much of this Ralph guy in there. And I think that's probably true. But RDA, you know, we've done some good things, and we love to do a good ad. You know, we had one that was, we put it right across from Little League, and boy, did that upset the Chamber of Commerce. And it said, shale gas development, not everything it's fracked up to be. So, you know, we try to get a little humor and get people to just take another approach. I don't know if I answer your questions correctly. My attention span is kind of drifted these days. I'm more focused on the energy transition than shale gas. So I've forgotten more than I knew, but I do appreciate that you got this word out, because we may need the country to help us come to the aid of Rock Run if this ever happens again.
Right.
And don't come visit it. It's not Yosemite. You don't need to see it. It doesn't need people. It's full of timber rattlers and ticks, and stay away from it.
So I mean, Ralph, you just alluded to this a bit with, so for about 5 to 6 years, you were basically full-time focused on advocacy to restrict or, roll back if possible fracking. But now you're not. Now you're focused on other things such as renewable energy. So this, I guess, leads to a bigger question that there's no one answer, but I'd like to hear what you think about what do we do now? I mean, with like, what do we do now with fracking? Can we leave it? Do you think that we'll leave it in the ground or leave most of it in the ground? How do we kickstart getting to see the end of fracking?
Right. Well, we've got a great administration with a wonderful, wonderful energy policy, and a lot of people on board with that. And the data shows that the public's on board. In theory, that it's just not a high priority issue yet. We have to make it one. This is really key. We have to tie it in with our health outcomes, which are terrible in this country. We can clean that up a lot by getting off this stuff. And we have an industry that will fight to the death to keep doing what they're doing, and they have the rights to do it, and the courts will back them up. So we got to tax them to death eventually. And we don't want that to cost the consumer, because that can really, really be difficult on lower income people and even, regular medium income people. So we have to do this very carefully. And we can't do it without bipartisanship. We have to be able to really get people who are just beginning to understand that they've been lied to for 40 years by this industry. They're the PR kings, and they've been fighting climate change and global warming and whatever you want to call it, ever since Carl Sagan's book came out in 1980 and talked about it. So we've got to somehow work with other people. The environmental movement, it's not enough to just speak to the base. And now we have a leader that gets that. And to think that we came from Governor of Washington, Jay Inslee, saying energy's got to be our organizing principle, and now it's actually happening. So there's a lot of work for everybody. I see that there's a question here, and that's my job to ask you, Colin. So it's more of a comment, but with the money some people are getting from the energy companies, we call them operators, it is a difficult moral decision. My father's cousin has been getting $75,000 a month from drilling on their farm.
Yeah. And yeah, that's, and certainly, and Ralph, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Most people don't get that kind of money, but some do. And it seems that more hope that they do, or even if they get, there's some folks who, one thing to understand, and maybe everyone in the audience understands it. Somebody living in New York City, I didn't understand it, that you can own 200 acres and be poor, because these are like, they've inherited, a lot of them have inherited this property. And so the tax bill on it is like really burdensome, and just, they're land poor. And so, I did talk to many people that even if there wasn't anything close to that kind of money, that even getting a leasing bonus, a one-time leasing bonus of $10,000, $20,000, just say, boy, like I haven't even paid my property tax bill in a couple of years. I'm behind on it. Now I can even that out. Certainly. I think the one thing I would add, and I talk about this a lot in the book, and if Ralph has any impressions, I'd encourage him to share them, is that I will say that at least in the area where I went, this rural part of north central Pennsylvania, I was surprised at how few landowners saw it as a difficult moral decision. Most people supported it. It meshed with their politics. They were generally anti-regulation, generally pro-property rights, pro-development. Even as Ralph alluded to, like a kind of pride in whether it's energy independence, or even a pride in like, my parents farm this land, I don't farm it anymore, but now I'm like, making it productive again. And so it's just to say that I think for some people, it's a difficult moral decision, but I was surprised at how many people, they got the money and it fit with their politics. They were for domestic oil and gas production. Some of them were okay with disruption in natural landscapes. And they were not in favor of environmental regulation, in particular because it would put restrictions on what individuals can do with their own property. I don't know, Ralph, if you have anything to add to that.
I do. I mean, I think the problem is these people that don't quite get yet that, they love their grandchildren, and the world that they're going to leave them with cannot sustain this stuff. And how do we get that message across? And because they don't believe it. And neither do the politicians, and neither do the newspapers around places like this, which are many of them, in the country. So I think the interesting thing about all this shale gas thing and this incredible engineering feat is that very little land is actually needed to produce incredible amounts of gas if it was done in some kind of organized, planned manner, which of course we don't do. Now we try to build a housing development, look what you have to go through, but try to frack 2/3 of Pennsylvania, there's no plan. So it turns out that probably 80% of the gas comes from a few counties, even though it stretches through 2/3 of the state. And a lot of these people can't make money. But the oil and gas industry, and I know this because I worked in it, it's always been a great way to get rich losing other people's money. And so, sure, some of these people could make money because they know they got lucky, or they knew where the high value resources are, the sweet spots where more gas will come out. So we need to somehow make it economically intolerable to do this nonsense development that just loses money. And maybe they can make money because they're good at hedging or something, but they don't make money in their core business, which is paying to extract the gas, paying the costs, and selling it. For Pennsylvania gas isn't worth what anyone else's. It's lower because we overproduce it. So there is another question. I hope that answers it to some degree. Do you have a favorite story in the book, or a favorite anecdote from the book writing process, Colin?
I'll force myself to pick one because I feel like it's a cop-out if I pick a few. I will say that my favorite story, although it's hard because there's a few, but one, perhaps because it's the most surprising and illuminating, is an individual who we meet, who Ralph knows well, who is against drilling, is a part of a lawsuit at the time that is suing the state because they're for saying that it goes against this environmental amendment in the state constitution that Ralph mentioned, that royalties generated from oil and gas drilling were being used for the general fund. And the lawsuit said that they should go back into conservation. This person owned the 150 acres that they put a lien on so that it would be protected in perpetuity through a conservancy organization. And her husband are quite well off. And eventually, despite all of this, they leased their land for drilling. Their lease was very restrictive. The surface cannot be disturbed. They can only drill horizontally from somebody else's property underneath it. And and at the time, this was so perplexing for me to wrap my head around. It's so easy to call this couple hypocrites, right? And to say, how could you do that? And it really, and what it's about is, and it makes sense. If you're in the situation, the closer I got to the situation, the more I could sympathize. Was they held out, they didn't lease, they were fighting against fracking for years. And while this is happening, a well pad goes up across the street. Right across the street. They see it. They see the drilling rig. They're flaring it. So after they drill it, they're burning off the gas before it's hooked up to a pipeline. It's like a jet engine. That's how loud it is. They can't even sleep at night. There's lighting up the whole valley. The road is so pockmarked with potholes that could destroy your car from these trucks going by. And basically, they said, we held out, we refused to lease, and it didn't stop anything. Our whole area is now basically a mining town. And so what they came to view was leasing. Again, none of their surface is going to be disturbed. Was they just started to feel like fools, and that at least leasing was getting some kind of compensation, reparation for the quality of life disturbances they had already endured, right? And so I think that for me was a really compelling story because it's surprising, and it also, I think importantly, what it demonstrates is how individuals, and this actually goes back to this first comment, can be forced, even those who are against it can be forced to go against some of their core principles because of the almost utter absence of real regulation at the state and federal level. I mean, fracking is almost not regulated at the federal level at all. It's devolved to the states. And while of course there's a Department of Environmental Protection, and people, some operators are fined and get in trouble. It was only last year that a grand jury found that the Department of Environmental Protection in Pennsylvania was so negligent in holding oil and gas operators accountable that the grand jury recommended that the Attorney General be able to be involved in overseeing and prosecuting these cases. And so it's that absence of any kind of of trusting that other people will step in and regulate this process so that you will not be impacted in such a way from somebody else's lease. It's everybody for themselves, right? And it's this classic story of the tragedy of the commons where at some point you realize I'm a fool for not doing this because everywhere around me is still being despoiled. I'm still dealing with all the consequences. So I may as well get compensated by leasing my own property for it. As far as the book writing process, my favorite anecdote was when it's over. I mean, really, this took a long time. I had 2 kids, but there's been some moments where when the book was done or almost done, I went back and sat down with some folks that I hadn't seen in a while, like Tom and Mary Crawley, who did settle a lawsuit, for instance, and while their water, they still can't drink it, they were able to build some additions onto their house, and are finding a way to try to move on with their life. And revisiting with some people and being able to show them photographs that were taken, talk to them about, how they were going to be written in the book, share with Ralph a draft of the book and see what he thought about it. And so I would say that's my favorite moment from the book writing process, is when it's finally wrapping up and I can start to share it with the people who are at the center of the story. Well, it's that's the final question. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Colin and Ralph, for spending this evening with us on behalf of Town Hall. Just want to thank the audience as well, and thank you for your insightful conversation and all the work that went into this book and all the work that both of you do on this subject. I would just like to implore the audience, if you're interested, if you want to dive deeper into the subject matter, pick up a copy of the book from our partner bookseller, Third Place Books. The link is in the chat of this video. And thank you again so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great night.